Okay, there we go. All right. Well, tonight we are talking about trauma. It is a very, very important topic. We'll go over some statistics and things like that. But I've told you each night I'm going to kind of help you understand the disorder or the diagnosis or the mental health thing in a brand new way. Well, when I think of trauma, I think about a balloon. And really what I think about, hold on, my bad, sorry. Let me try again. Okay. When I think about trauma, sorry about that. I think about a balloon because oh my goodness. Sorry. Hold on. Let me try one more time. When I think about trauma, I think about a balloon, and I'm not going to do it this time. But how many of you tensed up and thought I was going to use this thumbtack that's on my finger to pop the third balloon? And even you all, when you came in, you looked at the balloon and you said, are you going to pop that balloon to help us understand trauma? And I was like, oh, that would be too easy. But it is. It's too easy. Oh, goodness, there goes my water, everything. Well, tonight is about trauma. And if you found yourself after that first balloon pop, waiting for another balloon pop, you experienced just a glimpse of what trauma really is like. We'll learn tonight that trauma is about what happened and is about the incident, but it's much, much more than that. There is some stuff going on in the brain. It'll be all right. I appreciate it. I'll get it at the end. But there is much, much more going on than just the thing that happened. And if you found yourself, maybe even when you walked in, you saw the balloon and you're like, this cannot be good. This cannot be a good thing. Then you are experiencing a little bit of what trauma feels like, especially to a child who has been through something so difficult. And then something comes up that reminds them of that thing, and their brain goes right back into that same mode. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight, is what trauma is, where it comes from, and what is going on in the brain, and then how to help if trauma does happen. First things first, though, trauma can be different to all sorts of different people. It does not have to make sense to you that what the person went through was traumatic to them. If they feel like they were in danger, or if they feel like they were going to be separated from someone that they really love, even if that logic doesn't make sense to you, it is still trauma to that person. So don't write it off just because you don't understand it, or if you think like, oh, that would be so easy for me to get through. Different people go through different things in different ways, and trauma is different for every single person that it happens to. I do have a few stories about trauma, but I want to let you know up front, I am safe with my stories. There are some things that I have worked with kids through that are just too intense for me to share in an environment like this. So I hope that tonight as I share, even as I share some stories, even some difficult ones, it's not going to be something that is too overwhelming for you. But just know I am going to share a few stories, but not graphic detail around those stories. I've worked with clients who have witnessed lots of community violence, especially in the city of Louisville, that is happening quite a bit right now. And it's not at an outrageous level. It's not way more than used to be or anything like that, but there is quite a bit of community violence, especially in our city of Louisville. I've worked with some clients who witnessed quite a bit of that community violence. It didn't necessarily happen to them, but it happened in their neighborhoods, or they heard about it, or it happened to someone that they loved deeply. And one client in particular, I worked with him, and he had witnessed lots of community violence, and he started to become aggressive himself. He would be at school, and he'd be lashing out, and he would get in lots and lots and lots of fights at school and had no remorse whatsoever. When people came to him and said, why did you get in that fight? He would just say, because I wanted to. And that was it. And they would say, well, are you sorry that you did it now? And he would look at them and go, no, I am not. Just lots of aggression and no remorse from that at all. We'll talk about him a little bit later. I've also worked with clients who experienced lots of abuse when they were younger, and so lots of things that got encoded into the brain. I specialize in a few things. Many of you know that I specialize in what's called autism spectrum disorder, but I also specialize in what's called developmental trauma. And developmental trauma is any trauma that happens in the first 3 years of life. You may have heard all kinds of things that say, like, the first 3 years are so important. Everything about the first 3 years, make sure that you are reading to your baby and reading to your infant and making sure that you're giving them all kinds of enrichment. Those first 3 years are incredibly important. Well, there's another window of time that's also incredibly important. It's between the ages of 9 to 12. So from 0 to 3 and 9 to 12, the brain is actually very, what we call plastic. And that means it can be molded into all sorts of different things. And if trauma happens between 0 to 3 and 9 to 12, it just gets encoded deeper, almost as a worldview for that person. Not just that they'll have significant reminders from specific things, but they'll start to believe that the world is bad, or that they are bad, or that every other person is bad. Their worldview is molded if they had that trauma happen in the first 3 years or between 9 and 12. Well, I had a client who had many, many abusive things happen to him when he was very young, those first 3 years, all the way through until he actually graduated from high school, and he was participating in lots of risky behaviors. So things like lots and lots of drug use, really high alcohol use, and he was also doing anything he could to make other people like him. If you think of peer pressure, he was the one who would always give in to peer pressure because he just wanted everything to be okay with all the people that he was interacting with. And then I've also worked with some clients who witnessed some domestic violence between their parents. So their parents would fight. One client in particular, he had a real sensitivity to loud noises and crowds and anybody behind him. And then he started kindergarten. And guess what happens in kindergarten? There's lots of loud noises and crowds and people behind you. So he would actually become physically aggressive anytime there was a loud noise or a crowd or people behind him. And he would even run not just out of the classroom, but all the way out of the school, and even ran across a highway one day because he was just, he had such a trauma reaction to those things. We will talk about each of those kids at the end, and you'll get to hear a little bit more about their stories. But that gives you just a glimpse of what trauma can look like and where it might come from. Let's talk first, though, before we talk about what you can do if someone has been through trauma, let's just talk about some ways to stop trauma before it ever starts. Some ways that you can be on the look for trauma. If you were here last week during the anxiety talk, you know that my first N of anxiety is defend, because I'm allowed to do it however I want. It's defend, and there are some things that we can all do to protect kids from trauma ever happening. Some things where we can be on the look and we can be kind of the goalies and the safeguards. And you can remember in our session about anxiety, we talked about defending kids. This is the same. I want to give you kind of a guideline that you can follow to understand if a child may be about to experience something traumatic, so that you can be on the look and say, like, we're not going to do that. That is not something that they need to experience right now. And it all comes down to developmental stages. This is a beautiful plant that is not mine. Is anybody a plant person? Does anybody have plants in your house? Yeah. This is a very nice plant. I don't know what this is. Does anybody know? Oh, maybe. I don't actually know the answer. So whatever you're going to say to me is fine. But you can see that this plant grows in different stages, and that's how children are as well. There's different developmental stages that they go through. And the big guideline that I want to share with you is we want kids to experience everything that is developmentally appropriate for them and keep them from experiencing anything that is not developmentally appropriate for them. I'll say it one more time. Let kids experience everything that is developmentally appropriate for them and keep them from experiencing anything that is not developmentally appropriate for them. Let me give some examples of things that might not be developmentally appropriate for kids. Some details that those kids are just not ready for. In my office, we do a screener when people come in to see if they need to be connected to other resources. And some of the questions that we ask are, in the past year, has the oil, gas, or water or electric company threatened to shut off services in your home? Another question is, in the next 2 months, are you concerned that you may not have stable housing? Those are questions we ask when people first come into our office. And for the most part, I work with younger kids, so I'm asking their parent those questions. But I went to my supervisors and went to the agency, and I said, I think we actually need to put this on paper, because when I'm asking those questions of a parent and a child is hearing the electric company threatened to shut off services in our home, that's a detail that they're not ready for. Or if the parent says, yes, I am concerned that in the next 2 months we are not going to have a house, that is a detail that a child is typically just not ready for. So those details, oversharing of things. It's not to say that you can't say something like, hey, we need to spend less, or hey, no, we're not going to be able to go out to eat this week, whatever it might be. But oversharing of those details a lot of times is too much for a child. Or on the other hand, making them responsible for adult problems. So if you decide that, hey, me and mom are in a fight, and now you are going to be in the middle of that fight, and you are going to help us to negotiate that fight, that's too much for a kid. A child should never be placed in the middle of that. And really a big thing is just to let kids be kids. Let them play and let them have their imagination. Let them be silly. Don't try to take that from them. And then when you are getting upset, it's important to model how you are handling your emotions. We were talking before the session about calm down corners in classrooms, and one of the coolest things that I ever saw happen in a classroom was a teacher. She was trying to get the class's attention over and over and over again, and finally she said, you know what, class? I need to use the calm down corner real quick. And she herself went over to the calm down corner and showed the kids, this is how you stay in control of yourself. I do not think she was about to lose control. She was not about to start screaming. She was not even really angry. She was just modeling, here's how to handle frustration. Well, for kids, if they see you and they just see you either fly off the handle, that's not something that they can handle. Or if they never see you ever acknowledge that you have any negative emotion whatsoever, that's also not developmentally appropriate for them, because we want to expose them to different emotions. Those are just some things to think about, but there's a real guideline that you can follow. It's a 3-step questioning system that you can ask yourself to understand, is this developmentally appropriate? The first part is, can they understand it? That is the first question, first and foremost. Many, many times, we share things with kids and they cannot even understand what we are trying to say. We have to go into elaborate detail about what it is we're trying to say. If you think about it like a joke, if you have to explain a joke, the joke is no longer funny. It's just not. The same can be true with these experiences. If you have to explain and over-explain and go into significant detail about these things, it's probably just not something that their brain is ready to understand just yet. So question 1, just can they understand it? It's a pretty simple one. The second question is, can they regulate their emotions through it? So while I'm explaining this, or while this thing is happening, can they stay regulated? At the start of the session, when I popped the balloon, I saw many of you go like that the first time it happened. The second time you're like, oh, is he going to keep doing this? Is this going to be 90 minutes of him popping balloons? Yeah. But that is losing regulation. It's dysregulation. And if a child is having that through something, or while you're explaining something, it may just be that this is not developmentally appropriate for them to be able to go through. And then the final question is, can they recover from it afterward without long-term distress? So not to say that they won't ever think about it, but after you have said this thing, or after they have been through this thing, is it going to be the thing that is just ingrained in their mind, and it's really hard for them to think about anything else? Many of us have had nightmares before. Most nightmares, you wake up the next day, it might be startling for just a bit, and then you can move on. But maybe you've had a nightmare before where it was very intense and very realistic, and you wake up, and the next day, there is some linger to that nightmare. Or if you have a spouse and you are staying with them, maybe you have woken up before angry at your spouse for something they did in your dream. Has that ever happened? Think about it like that. I saw some of you just stare at your spouses. Don't do that. Don't look. Don't look. Don't look. Don't look. But does it cause them to keep thinking about it long term? And is it stressful for them to continue thinking of it even after the thing has happened? So it's this 3-step system. Can they understand it? Can they regulate their emotions through it? And can they recover from it without long-term distress? If the answer to those things is yes, developmentally appropriate. If the answer to many of those things, or a few of those things, or sometimes even one of those things is no, it may not be developmentally appropriate for the child to experience just yet, and it may be something that can have a lasting impact like trauma. I'll give you a few examples from my life. I have talked a little bit about stranger danger in some of my other sessions, and if you weren't in those sessions, let me recap just very briefly. When I was in the third grade, second or third grade, I had the same teacher, so I don't remember which. There was a woman who came to our school, and she put on a program called Stranger Danger. Did anybody ever have this program? Did anybody? Okay. All right, she came in, and she told us in no uncertain terms, at some point, someone is going to try to kidnap you. And then she showed us a jujitsu hold to break out of if somebody tries to grab you by the wrist, and she was like, don't let them ever put you in the trunk. I mean, and they showed pictures of news stories of all this stuff that was going on. It was way too intense. The thing that is ingrained in my memory, and I think I've said this exact thing in another session, so forgive me, but I have to get it out. She said, if you go to the movies, don't go to the bathroom, because if you go to the bathroom, there are kidnappers standing on the toilets, and when you open the stall, they will snatch you, and if you scream, people will think it's just part of the movie. That was too much for my little second and third grade brain to understand, to the point where I actually ended up having to go to therapy because of stranger danger. I could not sleep in my own bed until I was in the 7th grade. Little Carson, who just slept in his own bed last night, way ahead of me. I had to sleep on the floor of my little brother's bedroom because I was so scared that kidnappers were going to climb in through my windows and take me. But I do remember when we got back to the classroom, Miss Nielsen, who was one of the best teachers that I ever had, she has actually passed away due to cancer, but she was incredible, and she could tell that we were just shaken. And so she sat us all down, and she was trying to explain some of what had just happened in that program, and she looked at us, and she was like, well, how are people feeling? And I raised my hand, and I said, I'm feeling really afraid. And she looked at the whole class, and she said, I hope that you all can be aware but not afraid. There's a big difference between aware and afraid. And we went into this discussion about the difference between aware and afraid. The damage had already been done. I needed therapy. I couldn't sleep in my own bed. But it was very nice of Miss Nielsen to sit us down and try to explain those things. Another thing that happened in my lifetime was September 11th. I was in the 7th grade when September 11th happened, and I was actually at lunch when everything happened, but we came back to class after lunch, and my science teacher, Mr. Mangum, who is another incredible teacher that I had, shout out Mr. Mangum, he was incredible. We came back to class, and he sat the whole class down and said, some of you may have heard the news. There has been an attack on the World Trade Centers. There are many schools who are stopping class to watch the news and watch what happened. We are not going to stop class and turn on the news. I just wanted to make you aware, but this is something you need to go home and discuss with your family. How amazing. I mean, if I was there, I would have been like, if I was there now, I would be like, yes, Mr. Mangum, you got it. That is the best way. Do you see, not oversharing those details, but giving it to us in a way where we understood, we had heard murmur of things around the cafeteria. So they didn't want to not say anything, but give us just enough that our little brains could understand, and then our families could help us understand even more because they knew us better and knew how to help us through it better. So just remember those three things: that understand, regulate, and recover. There's one more thing that I want to talk about in protecting kids from trauma, and that is spanking. And this is my hot take on spanking. Sometimes people kind of tune out when I start to say what I'm about to say. There is a verse in the Bible, it's Proverbs 13:24, and here's the Bible verse. Here's what it says: whoever spares the rod hates their children, but the one who loves their children is careful to discipline them. Okay? This is where that phrase, spare the rod, spoil the child, has come from. And it, for too many years, has been an excuse for people to be like, we get to hit them. We get to not spare the rod, because if I spare the rod, I'm not doing what God told me to do. I need to do what God told me to do. I need to not spare the rod. Well, what that verse is actually talking about, the rod was a shepherd's staff. It wasn't a striking stick. It wasn't like a fraternity paddle that you used. It was a shepherd's staff. And a shepherd would use that rod to hook their sheep and push and pull and guide their sheep. That's the rod. The rod is a rod of guidance, not of striking. As a matter of fact, if you hit a sheep, that sheep will never, ever want to come back to you, ever. My younger brother raised sheep to slaughter them, but he wanted he wanted them to come when he called them so that he could do different things with them before he wanted to hand slaughter these. It was wild. I did not participate. I was not a proponent of this. But he didn't want to do anything to hurt the sheep, because sheep will not forget that. They will remember, you are the one who hurt me. I am not coming near you again. So that rod is not about hitting. It's about guiding and pushing and pulling. And what spanking teaches is that when I'm angry enough, I'm allowed to hit. A child, all they see is, that is someone hitting me. No matter how you phrase it, they just see, that is somebody hitting me. So it teaches them, when I'm angry, I'm allowed to hit. When I get angry enough, I'm allowed to hit. It also teaches that someone can love me and hit me and tell me that it's what's best for me, and I should be okay with that. Ooh. It also teaches, don't get caught. It doesn't teach what to do instead. It doesn't teach my body should be respected, and it doesn't teach that people who love me should not touch me this way. Think about that, especially as we're talking about trauma. Now, I am not saying that if you spanked your child, you have caused some irreversible trauma in them. That is not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is, why risk it? If you have the choice now, don't step into that. It's just not worth it. It teaches the wrong things and doesn't teach the things that we're actually wanting them to learn. And if it's been a biblical reason that you have decided to incorporate spanking, that reason isn't even valid. So let it go. Let's talk now about statistics of trauma, because we talked about how to prevent the trauma by helping kids experience everything that is developmentally appropriate and helping them level up in developmentally appropriate ways so that they can handle things that are greater and greater. That's why we want to expose them to those things. We talked about keeping them from anything that's not developmentally appropriate. So let's talk now about what happens when trauma does take place. Over 2/3 of children, it's over 66%, report experiencing trauma before age 16. That is a lot of kids. 2/3 of kids report having experienced something traumatic before they ever turn 16. What that means is that even with our best efforts, sometimes trauma happens. So let's talk about what to do when trauma does happen. And here's some things that you can look for. Number one is if a child tells you that it happened. If a child tells you that trauma took place, believe them. Believe that child. It is not your job to try to figure out all the details. It's not your job to investigate it on your own. It's not your job to protect your friend who maybe they're talking about. It is just your job to listen to them and believe them. And as a matter of fact, in the state of Kentucky, every single adult is what's called a mandated reporter. What that means is that if someone, a child or an adult who isn't able to take care of themselves, shares with you that they have been abused in some way, it is your responsibility to make a report about that abuse. And that if you heard about it and you don't report it, and then it is found out that you heard about it and did not report it, you are also now liable in that crime of abuse. Make sure if a child tells you that abuse happened, believe them and report it. There's some different ways that you can report it. There's actually online reporting. It's available Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can go on and make an online report. You can also make a phone call to the number 988, just 988. And I'll talk about 988 later, but it is a great resource. If you just call 988 and say that you would like to report a situation of abuse, they will help guide you through all of that. So number one thing to look for is a child tells you the abuse happened. If they do, just believe that it did happen. But trauma can also look like so many different things. There's lots of symptoms. And in all the other diagnoses, all the other things I shared with you, all the different symptoms, if I were to go into every symptom of PTSD, we would spend the rest of our session talking about the symptoms of PTSD. There are what are called intrusion symptoms, avoidance symptoms, negative cognitive symptoms, negative mood symptoms, all sorts of symptoms out the wazoo. There are symptoms everywhere. Trauma can look like so many different things. Trauma can look like aggression. Trauma can look like a change in mood. Trauma can look like avoidance. Trauma can look like feeling completely alone or isolating oneself. Trauma can look like ruminating on the trauma. Trauma can look like an exaggerated startle response where the phone rings and a child jumps. Trauma can look like nightmares that happen persistently. Trauma can look like difficulty focusing and concentrating. Trauma can look like anger. Trauma can look like hyper sensitivity to different sensory things or hypersensitivity to different sounds. Trauma can look like bruises. Trauma can look like difficulties with memory. Trauma can look like so many different things. Because of that, I don't want you to try to look for all those different things. I'm going to give you another framework that you can follow to see if something may be going on with a child. This is actually a framework that you can use with any child for any reason to understand that they may need some extra support, but let me talk about it tonight specifically with trauma. So there's all those symptoms and there's all those things that you can be looking for, but there's really three big things that you can be on the lookout for. Number one is changes. The second is patterns. And the third is extremes. Changes, patterns, and extremes. Like I said, this doesn't always mean that trauma happened, but usually it means that this child needs some extra support. Let me give you some examples through trauma, and then you can kind of think about it based on some other things too. So with changes, what you can think about is something different than before? If you have a child who has just always been rather anxious, that's not a change. But if you have a child who was not really anxious at all, and they become very anxious, that's a big change. Or think about this one. Maybe it's this thought of like, they used to be so happy. They used to be so happy, and now their mood has totally shifted. Now they are just much more withdrawn and sad and maybe scared more often. That happiness just isn't coming out in them. Or it could be that they used to love certain things or love being around certain people, and now they are just completely rejecting those things. If those things are happening, that is a big change that says this child probably needs support. It doesn't always mean trauma. It can mean trauma, but it does mean this child probably needs some support. Something happened that is deeper going on that caused that change to happen. So is something different than before? The second one is patterns. The question you can ask is, does something keep happening even when we've worked so hard to stop it? And some of you are thinking like, oh, I have definitely seen some patterns. I have seen some patterns of behavior. Again, that doesn't always mean trauma, but it does mean this child needs support. But let me tell you some patterns that you can look for specifically related to trauma. If this child is always on edge, they're always like waiting for something to happen, or they're ready to always kind of jump at different things, and they're always scanning the environment for something to happen, that is an indicator they might need some extra support. And it's an indicator that trauma may have taken place. Another one is a pattern of a negative mood. It is okay to have days where you feel so great. And it is okay to have some days where you are ready for that day to wrap up. You are ready. I end every day with my ice cream. I end every day with a pint of Ninja Creamy ice cream. It is the best. And there are some days where I am really ready to get to my Ninja Creamy ice cream. I am just waiting for it. Is like, okay, 8 o'clock needs to get here so that I can get to my Ninja Creamy. There are days where I want that to happen much faster. And that's okay. But if there is this persistent negative mood, it's this pattern of a negative mood, and the negative mood takes over. Last week I told you about Inside Out and Inside Out 2. Hopefully you did your homework and watched those movies. They are great. And I talked about the emotions. When they push the button, then they take over in the brain. So if you are noticing that those negative emotions have pushed the button and they are taking over in the brain much more, that is a pattern of a negative mood, and that means that that child might need more support. It may mean that trauma has happened, especially if that's a big change for them. If there's a pattern of risky behavior, I gave you the example of my client at the start who was really starting to engage in lots of different drug use. He was using uppers, and then he'd get up and he'd use downers and go down, and then he'd use uppers and go back up again, and he was trying to take a mix of all kinds of things and going up and down. Very, very risky behaviors. If you notice in a child that they are showing risky behaviors over and over and over, and you've tried to support them through that, you've tried to talk them through that, you've tried to work with them on not participating in those behaviors, and it just keeps happening over and over and over, that's an indicator. Trauma may have happened, but it's definitely an indicator they need some extra support. And the final one is if there's a pattern of avoiding people or places or things. And it could be for any number of reasons. It could be because that person is the one that the trauma happened with. It could be that that place reminds them of the trauma. It could be that that sound reminds them of the trauma. But if there's just this ongoing avoidance of different things, it could be that trauma happened, but likely means that child needs some extra support. So changes, patterns. Now let's talk about extremes. We talked about, is something different than before? Does something keep happening even though we've tried to work through it? And then these extremes are, is something way out of proportion? I have a mentor who has been my mentor for a long, long time, and he actually was my mentor for a long time when I was very young. And then we had about a gap of about 20 years where we didn't get to see each other. And just last year, we got to see each other again for the first time in like 20 years. And during our meeting, we met up at Chick-fil-A. He got a phone call, and all of a sudden, his face just got really big. And I was like, oh, my goodness, something really bad has happened. Like, somebody has died. I mean, he has given this big reaction. I was like, I'm about to have to be the therapist to my mentor. This is going to be awkward. What am I about to do? He is talking, and all of a sudden he hangs up on the phone, and he's like, oh my gosh, that was nothing. And he disclosed to me, and I will edit this out of the video, but he disclosed to me, he said, my wife often has reactions that are out of proportion to the actual event. Now, that is just an example, but we took a picture at the Chick-fil-A, and there's a Chick-fil-A sign, and it had some words on it and things, and so I actually photoshopped that picture to say, make sure your reaction is in proportion, and sent it to him so that he could show it to his wife, and so that they could enjoy that together. But think, like, is something way out of proportion? Is there a small thing that's getting a really big reaction? Does something smaller happen in life, and it's having this big response from the child. If that happens, it could be that trauma has happened, but it's likely that that child needs some extra support. You can watch for things like if they just believe that they are just totally bad, or that everybody is totally bad, or that the world is just totally bad. That's a pretty extreme thing. I am bad all the time, everybody else is bad all the time, and the world is just a horrible place. That's a pretty big extreme. We don't want a child to be holding on to that. If they start blaming themselves for something that happened, and it truly was not their fault whatsoever, that blame is an extreme. If they start to have flashbacks or big startles about things, or one that you can look for in children is big tantrums. Tantrums that last for long periods of time, or are really explosive or damaging to property or other people, risky behaviors, or if there is intentional harm of themselves or of other people. Those are all some extremes that you can look for. It could be that trauma has happened, but it is very likely that that child needs some extra support. So watch for those three things: changes, patterns, and extremes, rather than trying to look for all the symptoms and think like, oh, is this enough symptoms for it to be trauma? I'm not sure. I don't quite know what's going on. Changes, patterns, extremes. Just think about it that way, and then you'll know, oh, you know what? This child needs extra support. Maybe something happened, but very likely they need some extra support here. Let's talk specifically about trauma and what trauma is. I'm going to give you another fill in the blank from all my fill in the blank people. Yes, oh yes. This is one that some people can get. So let's see. And I'll come back to it, so don't shout out your answers just yet. Trauma is not about what blank. It's believing what blank is still blank. Trauma is not about what blank. It's believing what blank is still blank. Don't say it just yet, not yet. I told you that over 2/3 of children report having experienced something traumatic before the age of 16. Well, 1 in 11 children meets criteria for a trauma disorder diagnosis. 1 in 11. We talked about the different diagnoses with anxiety. We talked about some statistics with autism. We talked about it's 1 in 31 kids with ADHD. We talked about some different numbers. For trauma, it is 1 in 11 kids. But trauma is way underdiagnosed. It does not hardly ever get diagnosed. Let me give you an example from a meeting that I recently went to. At my agency, we have to do what's called a case conference for the reason that I'm about to share with you, where we have to share the details of a client that we just met, and that way the whole team gets to say, yes, I think you're on the right track with that person. It is fantastic. It is a really great thing that we do. So we had some clients come in, and part of my job is, especially with younger children, being kind of the one to say like, ooh, let's watch that. I wonder if this is correct. Maybe not. Let's look at it. Well, we had some kids come in, and the therapist gave their whole history, and then they said, and I've diagnosed them with ADHD. And I said, well, you told me that 6 months ago their house burnt down. And you did not say anything about that in your diagnosis. The diagnosis is trauma. Trauma can look a lot like ADHD. Imagine somebody who's always on edge and has difficulty focusing. What would most people look at that child and say? They'd say, that child is ADHD. Or if they are engaging in some impulsivity, lack of concentration, and fidgetiness, that is textbook ADHD. So people look at it and they say, oh, they're ADHD, they're having trouble focusing in school. And I have to say, well, they just went through something that was really, really difficult, and you left that out. We need to focus on that. We've got to deal with the trauma. ADHD may be under the trauma, but we got to take care of the trauma first. Or think about this other one, a child who has lived with 3 different families before the age of 4. That child was diagnosed with ADHD. And I said, no, that's trauma. That's trauma, having to move from all those places. And the reasons that they had to move from all those places, that's trauma. Or there was a child who watched his mother pass away. And they said that he was diagnosed with anxiety and depression. And I said, the anxiety and the depression come from the trauma. trauma is way underdiagnosed. And the reason that I share that with you is in each of our sessions, except for in the one where I should have talked about medication the most, I've tried to talk about medication a bit. Trauma many times gets diagnosed as other things, and then those other things, people think the quick fix is a pill. So they see a child who is fidgety, having difficulty concentrating, and impulsive, and they put them on a stimulant drug. What a stimulant drug does is stimulates the production of dopamine or norepinephrine, that adrenaline in the brain. It can stimulate either one. And imagine that you have a child who has been through something very, very difficult, and that is what's going on in their brain. And then their brain gets supercharged to think about that thing even more and to have even more energy flooding their brain along with that thing. That is a recipe for chaos. And the reason I share that with you is because, again, my stance is sometimes medication is life-changing and life-saving. In situations where there is significant distress, where the child literally cannot function in an environment they need to function in, or they are in real danger to themselves or others, medication is great. But medication should not be the first thing that we jump to, and medication should not be the only thing going on, because many times there may be something else going on that other people didn't get. Not everybody does those case conferences that I just told you about. Sometimes it's just one clinician who sits there, checks all the symptoms, and says ADHD, and then move right on and completely forget that this child has been through something really, really tough. Trauma happens all over the place, and we need to be more perceptive about it and more responsive to it. Each week we've also talked a bit about the neurotypical brain, because I'm a total nerd. So let me point out some pieces that are disrupted in the brain that has experienced trauma. The first is the amygdala. Last week in anxiety, we talked about the amygdala is that smoke detector. My mom is a terrible cook, remember? The smoke detector would go off every time she would cook, and she would say false alarm. That can happen in the amygdala. And the amygdala goes off anytime it thinks there's danger, and when it goes off, it cuts off access to every part of the brain above it. What parts of the brain are above it? Everything, pretty much everything, and they get trapped down in this fight or flight mode. There's actually 5 different responses that we'll go over tonight. There's 5 different responses to fight or flight. And Mr. T, this actually goes with something that you and I were talking about before the session started, about a reason to not yell at a child just because they're in a moment of discipline. We'll cover that when I talk about the 5 different responses here. So the amygdala is changed. Then in this lobe right here, it's called the temporal lobe, and I've told you that the temporal lobe is responsible for memory, mood, sound, and smell, and you knew that smell is the number 1 emotion that brings back memories because they are actually linked there together, and sound is the number 1 emotion that brings out mood because they are actually linked there together. Well, in the brain that has experienced trauma, there's this piece that's responsible for memory. It's called the hippocampus. What's it called? Hippocampus. The hippocampus is responsible for memory. That part is disrupted in somebody who has experienced trauma, and we'll get to that. And then there's the chemicals. Dopamine is the reward chemical. That one's disrupted. Serotonin is that stabilizer chemical. It helps the highs not be too high, the lows not be too low. That chemical is disrupted. Norepinephrine, let me remind you again, one of my life goals is to use an EpiPen on someone. I really, really want to do it. I want them to be okay. I want everything to be all right, but I do want to use an EpiPen on someone. If you know someone who uses an EpiPen, alert me so that I can always be on the lookout for them. Do not let them get the nasal one. It is not as much fun. I want to do the one through the leg. So norepinephrine, that's the adrenaline in the brain. And then GABA, the gamma-aminobutyric acid, that's the brain's brake pedal. It slows things down. And then cortisol. Cortisol, we started to talk about last week, and I told you trauma is the one that cortisol is really affected in. Cortisol is our stress chemical. Has anybody felt stressed over the past week? If you have felt stress, your brain is releasing cortisol into your system, and it alerts the system to be on guard for all kinds of different things. Cortisol is affected in trauma disorders. So let's see if you know our fill in the blanks. Trauma is not about what happened. It's believing what is still happening. That's right. Trauma is not about what happened. It's believing what happened is still happening. Whew. And here is the brain when it has experienced trauma, if it develops a trauma disorder. Because I told you about 2/3 of kids experience trauma, and about 1 in 11 kids, that's about 13% of that 2/3, would meet criteria for a trauma diagnosis. So just because someone goes through something traumatic does not mean they're going to develop a trauma disorder. But if they have developed a real trauma disorder and you're seeing those changes and patterns and extremes and those responses to the trauma, this is what's going on in their brain. You can see there are a lot of differences between this brain and the neurotypical brain. But let's talk about the ones that I went over just a moment ago. The first one is right here. That amygdala has turned into what's called Pavlov's dog. Oh, Pavlov's dog is one of my favorite things. It is a very interesting thing. It's called classical conditioning. Pavlov was a scientist, and what he did was he had a dog. It was Pavlov's dog. Got it? Are you with me so far? So Pavlov's dog, and what Pavlov did is he would have a piece of steak, and he would show the dog a steak, he'd ring a bell, then show the dog a steak. The dog would drool, he'd give the dog a steak, okay? Ring a bell, show the dog a steak, the dog would drool, he'd give the dog a steak. Ring a bell, show the dog a steak, dog would drool, give the dog a steak. Ring a bell, show the dog a steak, dog would drool, give the dog a steak. And he did that over and over and over and over and over again until one day he rang the bell, no steak, and the dog drooled. Because that dog's brain had learned, when I hear that bell, some of you, when you were a kid, you knew when they use my full name, right? Stuart Miles Perry, you are, don't go running. Go in there sheepish and like this, right? You are in trouble. Our brains learn those things, and the amygdala learns things over time. When trauma happens, the amygdala turns into that Pavlov's dog, and then anything that is a reminder of the trauma can now set off the amygdala even in a safe environment. There have been clients I've worked with who have been abused by men. Then they come in and they see me, and I'm the first man that they have encountered since that abuse happened. And they are panicked because their amygdala says, there's a man. The last time there was a man, that was unsafe. We do not want to go into this situation. And their amygdala goes off. And when the amygdala goes off, it cuts off access to every part of the brain above it. What's above the amygdala? Everything. And they are trapped down here in what's called fight or flight mode. And that happens over and over and over again in someone who has experienced trauma. I told you there are actually 5 different responses in fight or flight. It's fight, flight, freeze, appease, and collapse. Fight, flight, freeze, appease, collapse. Fight is pretty simple to notice. It is a fight, either verbal or physical fighting. It can be slapping, it can be shoving, fight. Flight is get away. So in the brain, you can think about it as like, I'm either going to run towards that thing, I'm going to fight it, or flight, I'm going to run away from that thing. So fight or flight. In children, this can be running out of the classroom, it can be ducking under a table, it can be running out of the school, that flight. Then there's freeze. It is this lockup like this. Have you ever seen a child in trouble and they lock up like this? And then sometimes adults will look at them and say, you don't have anything to say for yourself? Oh, okay. Just nothing to say. Oh, so there's just nothing to say about that. So you're just going to sit there and you're just going to be totally quiet about it. Guess what? That child is not thinking, I am trying to be defiant right now. Their amygdala has gone off because a big bad adult is shouting at them and they have frozen. Fight, flight, freeze. Then there's appease. Appease is, I'm going to do whatever I can to just make you happy and just make it all good. Have you ever had a child who is in trouble and they start to giggle? Uh-oh. And then many adults look at them and say, oh, so it's funny now? Oh, so this is just funny? You think what you did was just hilarious. Wipe that smile off your face. That child is not thinking that this situation is funny. They're going, I'm trying to send a signal to you that I really need things to calm down. Can you please smile back at me or giggle or something so that I know that this is safe? Appease. They are trapped. Their amygdala has gone off. They are giggling not because it's funny, but because they are terrified and their brain has lost access to all the thinking parts of the brain. And then collapse happens in very extreme cases of trauma where the person can actually collapse. They actually do fall down. And this can be in children where they hide under their desk and curl up into kind of the fetal position. It's that collapse position. Fight, flight, freeze, appease, collapse. All those things can happen in children after they have experienced trauma or as they're going through trauma. Then I told you that this memory piece, do you remember the name of the memory piece? Oh, you have earned yourself, it's not my autism book. This is a book I wrote about helping kids understand emotions. It's called I'll Be the Albino Chameleon. Check it out. It's the hippocampus. The hippocampus is that part in the brain that helps us remember things. Well, in trauma, what happens is the brain is so offline. That amygdala has fired so hard and has cut off so much access to all the rest of the brain that it cannot encode trauma as a memory. It encodes it as a reaction. It does not get stored in the past. The brain does not understand that the trauma is over. It lives as if that trauma is happening and will continue to happen because the hippocampus is above the amygdala. So when that amygdala went off during the trauma, it didn't get to be stored in the brain as a memory in the past. It just is as if it's still ongoing. And what that means is that this person gets trapped in this cycle. It's almost like they're in a cage where it feels like they're trying to make sense of it, but they can't because it's not in the past. It's still happening, and they feel like the trauma is still going on. And it's really hard to help somebody recover from trauma when they're still in trauma and the trauma is still happening. And their brain says, it's still happening. It didn't used to happen. It is happening right now. There's a man. The last man I saw hurt me. This man is going to hurt me. It is not in the past. It is happening right now. And their brain does that over and over and over again because trauma is not about what happened. It's believing what happened is still happening. And that hippocampus gets affected and it gets stored as this reaction rather than in the past. Then there are the chemicals that are affected in trauma. Specifically dopamine. There's a lack of dopamine in the brain. The brain actually starts producing less dopamine, and that can lead to that negative mood shift that we talked about, where a child goes from being very happy to just feeling very negative, because that dopamine, that reward chemical that helps them feel good, it's not sending out in the brain. There's not enough of it happening in the brain. Then there's also a lack of serotonin, which can lead to a depression because it regulates mood, so those lows feel really low. It can also lead to a lack of sleep because serotonin helps regulate sleep too. And it can also lead to disruptions in appetite, all sorts of other things, because there's not enough serotonin in the brain. And then finally, there's a decrease in that GABA, the gamma-aminobutyric acid, the brake pedal. There's not enough of that. And so this person is always on high alert, and their brain cannot automatically slow it down. It is just always going without the ability to put on the brakes and say, whoa, we do not need to be in this mode right now, because their brain says, it's still happening. And so the brain says, no, we do not want to produce GABA, because if we put on the brakes right now, it's going to happen again. We're going to go through it again. Do not produce GABA. Do not slow things down. Stay on alert. So there's a less than typical amount of those chemicals. Then there's an increase of some chemicals. Cortisol, that stress chemical. And you and I know when we are stressed, we do not make good decisions. When I was on the phone with Spirit Airlines after they lost my baggage, and I was stressed out because I needed my baggage, and I also wanted them to give me some money for all that they had put me through. And I said to the woman, you have wasted my time, and now I'm going to enjoy wasting yours. That was not my brightest moment, but it was because my brain was flooded with cortisol. I was stressed out. And so what happens in these individuals is their brain is filled with stress, and sometimes to get rid of that stress, they'll use substances. Sometimes to get rid of that stress, they'll engage in risky behavior so that their brain goes elsewhere. Sometimes they will start hurting other people because they're always, that last straw is about to snap. That stress is increased in their brain. Then there's also an increase in that norepinephrine, the epi of the brain, the epinephrine of the brain, the adrenaline of the brain. And what that does is it leads to that hypervigilance where you're always watching for something to happen. It also leads to that overactive fight or flight response. So the fight or flight happens more often in these kids than in other kids because their brain is always looking for something. And if you are always looking for something, there will always be something to find. You can always find something to be anxious about, or always find something that's a reminder, or always find something that's upsetting. And their brain is constantly on the look, so it's finding it more and more and more. You can see how disruptive that this could be. But let me give an example that all of us have been through. This year, kindergartners who start kindergarten this year were born during COVID. Oh, yes. In 2020, 2019 and 2020, they were born. Let's say some extra prayers for teachers as they are dealing. And I can perform exorcisms if you need it. They were born during COVID. During COVID, we told kids that many things were dangerous. Can anybody tell me some of those things? People, yes. What else? Going outside. What else? Hugs. Yep. What else? Yes. What else? Sickness. Yep. Coughing. Yep. Everything. Yeah. What was it? Death. Yes, death. Being around other people. Sharing. Breathing. Coughing. All of those things, we told them for 2 years or more, if these things happen, you will die and everyone you love will die. And then we woke up one day and we said, you are going to love school. And we put them in a classroom and we said, now go be around 30 other kids. Make sure you're nice. Make sure you share. Make sure that you breathe. Make sure that you are doing all of your work. Make sure that you stay focused. Make sure that you just, maybe even share your snack at lunch. Make sure you do all those things. And kids are going, you told me this was going to kill me and everyone that I care about. And if you think about that first thing that we talked about with can they understand it? Can they regulate through it? Can they recover from it? Some people overshared some details with kids, and it ingrained in their brains as trauma of, I am going to die and everybody I love is going to die. And so then they got put in a classroom with 30 other kids. They looked around and they go, I am not doing that. You can try to talk me into it all day long. This is not for me. It's a no for me, pal. I am not doing this. And they have run out of the classrooms and lashed out and fought each other and done all sorts of disruptive things because it's a trauma response. Not because they are bad kids doing bad things, but because trauma happened and their brain is saying, this is not safe, and their brain goes into fight, flight, freeze, appease, collapse mode. If you were driving a car and that car had experienced trauma, it would be like driving a car after you have had a flat tire, and then you get the tire fixed. But do you know what happens after you've had a blowout and then your tire gets fixed when you're driving around? You will always expect that tire is about to blow out. Not always, I shouldn't say always. But for a while, you're going to be driving thinking, it's going to go. There was one time I was driving pretty far and I had a blowout in one of my tires, and it is scary. A blowout is different than just a tire that goes flat. exploded, and I swerved across the road, and I had to pull over, and I was like, oh my goodness, whew, I am alive. Thank God. Like, I am okay. Then when I got back in my car after the tire had been fixed, it was very nerve-wracking. Just like that balloon popping at the start of the session, after it pops once, you are on the look for it to pop again and again and again. And that's what happens with trauma. If you were driving a car and the car had experienced trauma, that tire has blown out and you are on the lookout, on the alert for it to happen again. Well, we talked about how to prevent trauma from ever taking place by making sure that children are exposed to everything that is developmentally appropriate, keeping them from anything that is not developmentally appropriate. We asked our questions: can they understand it? Can they regulate through it? And can they recover from it without the lasting distress? And then we talked about what trauma looks like and what you can look for and the changes and the patterns and the extremes. We talked about what is going on in the brain. Now let's talk about how you can really support kids if trauma has happened, how you can be a support for them. Because the symptoms would tell you that the problem is what happened. But the real problem is believing what happened is still happening. So we need to help them finish their story. It's not encoded as a memory just yet, so we need to help that story have an end. Many times, if you talk to someone who has been through something really traumatic, they can tell you the beginning of that thing, and they can tell you the middle of that thing, and then they stop. They do not tell you the end of the story, because in their brain, it's not over. In their brain, it's still happening. So our job is to try to help them finish their story. And a reminder to be playful. I know that we have talked about some serious things, and trauma can be very, very serious. And I'm not trying to downplay it whatsoever. But the more serious and big you make it, the more serious and big it's going to be in a child's brain. The more playful and silly that you can be, and not by minimizing it or by trivializing it or by making them feel silly for bringing it up, but by you responding in playful and fun ways. That is going to be something very critical and helpful to kids. I've told you on almost every session that children learn, develop, and grow through play. Trauma is no different. Children learn, develop, and grow through play. When kids come into my office, there are lots of toys everywhere, and they get to just go about and play. And I have had some children who have been through horrendous trauma that I will not even share with you in these sessions. Trauma that I have had myself to go to therapy for, because hearing that trauma was traumatic for me. I have been in those situations. And when they come in my office, we have a blast. They beat up my wrestling dummy. They paint all over things. They draw big pictures. They make things in the sand tray. They put Legos together. They squeeze Play-Doh as hard as they can. You can still be playful even when, and especially if, something really difficult has happened. Be playful with kids. It's how they learn, develop, and grow always. So be playful. And one person who knew this so well, Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers said this: anything that's human is mentionable, and anything that is mentionable can be manageable. And Mr. Rogers knew how to play about some really intense subjects. Mr. Rogers played on his show about racism. Mr. Rogers played on his show about death. Mr. Rogers played on his show about community violence. Mr. Rogers knew how to play and not minimize and trivialize and make someone feel silly for it, but to be playful as you respond. And that's one thing that we can do. One resource that I have for you, and I'm not able to print them out because it's an actual book. You can get this at my website. It's badkidsdon'texist.com, and there is a resources page there. If you click on that resources page, I've written a few different books. One is about autism, one is Albie the Albino Chameleon, about emotions, and one is called Bruce the Hissing, Honking, Puffing, Pecking Goose. Bruce is a goose who has been through some trauma, and this is a story that helps kids learn what trauma even is. So this can be a story that you can share with kids just to help them understand about trauma. And it is a story that you can share with kids if trauma has happened to help them understand that trauma happens to others as well and can be a great conversation starter. If you go to my website, if you want to grab this, it is free to download. It is all free. And I even created an SEL curriculum for teachers to be able to use this story in a classroom setting as well. So there's a SEL curriculum for parents at home that you can do with your child at home, and then there's an SEL curriculum for teachers to be able to talk about trauma with their class, if you'd like, in a developmentally appropriate way. So that's just one thing. But another thing that you can do is help the child come up with what's called a trauma narrative in a clinical setting, but really it's just listen to their story. And really take it in. Don't try to, again, be an investigator and try to decide if it happened or if it didn't or anything like that. But if a child is willing to share their story with you, listen to that story and be interested in that story. And let them know that you are a safe person to share that story with. We'll talk about trauma narratives in just a bit as well, because as a lay person, it's not your job to complete a full trauma narrative. But if someone is willing to share their story with you, and you are able to take in that story, now if it's too much for you, then help them find someone that they can share it with. But if it is something that you feel like you can listen to, and for you, you can stay regulated through it, and you can recover from it after they've shared it with you, let them share that story with you, because as they share, their mind is making sense of it as well. In my office, kids make trauma narratives in all sorts of different ways, and I'll share some of those with you in just a bit. Another thing that you can help a child with is mindfulness and controlled breathing or deep breaths. This does not mean that when you start to see a child lose control, you look at them and you go, take your deep breaths. That is not the answer, okay? No child ever wants to take their deep breaths. I have had so many parents, and I have to laugh with them when this happens. A child will be dysregulated in the lobby of my office, and the parent will look at them and go, take your deep breaths. And the child will not take their deep breaths, and the parent will look at me and go, see, they don't do it. And I go, well, I wouldn't do it if you told me to do it that way either. But I call them over and I go, hey, let's take some deep breaths together. How about that for an idea? Let's take these deep breaths together. Let me teach you some fun ways to do deep breaths. One of my favorites is called starfish breathing. This is where the child holds their hand out in front of them, and you take your finger and you trace up and down their fingers. And as you go up a finger, you breathe in together. And as you go down a finger, you breathe out together. And it is this nice way to show, like, I am here with you. We are doing this together. And we're going to take 5 deep breaths together. You can also do it where you hold your hand out and the child traces your fingers. But just know that the first time they do it, they're going to go, and then you're just going to be like, you're going to hyperventilate. Slow down. And then you can go like, oh, that was a good one. Now let's see how slow we can do it. And they'll go, and do you see that's playful? It's not take your deep breaths. It's, let's make it a challenge. Okay, now let's see how slow we can do it. Let's see if we can take breaths like this. Let's see if we can take breaths all the way down in our belly. Do you see that's playful and silly without trivializing, minimizing, and make the child feel silly? It's just being playful in that moment. That's starfish breathing. Another one is called birthday candle breathing. I do really, really like this one for probably a naughty reason, but what happens is you hold your fingers out and the child will blow out your fingers as if they are birthday candles. And we are in church, so I won't show you which one they always leave up, but they always leave a particular one up. But in that moment, you can be silly and playful with them, and you can go, we need to blow that one out too. And they'll go, mm-mm. And it's like, yes, we need to blow that one out too. Let's blow it out together. And they blow it out. What that deep breathing does and why deep breathing works is because there's this feedback loop that happens in the brain. What happens is the amygdala goes off and it says we need to go in fight or flight mode. To prepare for that, I need the heart rate to pick up and your breathing to pick up so we are ready to run away or fight. That's what is happening in the brain. And so the amygdala sends a sensation to the lungs, and the lungs go, I am ready to fight or flight. And the lungs send that message back to the amygdala, and the amygdala says, great, keep doing that. And it goes again. Well, what happens when you can slow down that breathing is the amygdala sends a message to the lungs and says, speed up, we need to run away or fight. And the lungs go, and sends a message to the amygdala that says, you say that we need to speed up and that things are dangerous, but I'm breathing just fine. And the amygdala won't listen at first. The amygdala says, wait, no, you need to pick up your breathing so that we are ready to run away or fight. And it sends the message back to the lungs, and the lungs go. And that message goes back to the amygdala and says, no, we're going to be just fine, breathing just like this. What you thought was dangerous is a false alarm. I can breathe just fine. So deep breathing really works. Another one is mindfulness. And the reason mindfulness works is because mindfulness is all about what's happening right here, right now. And with trauma, what can happen sometimes, I'm not sure if you've ever used, Amazon has a thing that's called View It in Your Room, where you can purchase furniture or purchase a thing, and then you can say, view it in your room, and it turns on the camera of your device, and you can look at it as if it is in your room. You look on the screen, and it is showing your room with this new piece of beautiful Amazon furniture right there in it. And trauma kind of works that way, where the trauma will overlay into the environment as if it's still happening right now. And mindfulness is all about what is actually happening right here, right now. And I'll give you a game that you can play for kids with mindfulness. It's called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It is a lot of fun. You can do it lots of different ways, but 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, what it is I want you to tell me or show me 5 different things you can see right now. 5 things you can see right now. So the child is looking around and they're trying to see things that they see right now, and they're making sense of all this. Then it's 4 things that you can hear right now. 4 things that you can hear right now. Then 3 things that you can touch right now. 2 things that you can smell right now. And 1 thing that you can taste right now. And that might just be the spit in your mouth, or it could be cheese from the lunch that you just had, or whatever it might be. I still have a little bit of that left over, whatever it might be. I don't have that left. Don't judge me for what I eat for lunch. And it can be any sense. You can actually make 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 be anything. I do recommend it's 5 things you can see, just because typically that's the one you can do the most. But it can be 4 things that you can touch, 3 things that you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. You can do that just like talking to the child if they are really overwhelmed, or you can turn it into a game and say, go show me 5 things you can see right now. And they run to the thing and they say, I can see the beanbag, and they're right there with it. And I can see the camera, and they are right there with it. I can see the chair, and they're right there with it. And that gets some movement along with it. Do you see? You can be playful and silly and fun without minimizing, trivializing, and making the child feel silly, but it's still a fun and playful thing. And then you can say, it's almost like an I Spy game. You tell me 5 things you can see, now I'm going to tell you 5 things I can see. Or tell me 5 things that you can see that are red, whatever it might be. It helps the child be right here, right now, and can help them understand that what happened is not still happening right here and right now. So listen to the story if you feel that you can. If you can't, just help them get connected with someone who can. And then deep breathing and mindfulness. But one thing with trauma that is different than some of the other diagnoses is that oftentimes it does require professional help. If you know or even strongly suspect that trauma has happened with a child, it is likely that professional help is just a good route to take, just to make sure that it doesn't develop into a trauma disorder. Or if it does develop into a trauma disorder, they've got that support that's already there. For instance, sometimes with kids who have ADHD or anxiety, sometimes what they need is just some structure and support. They don't always need professional help. But with trauma, even if the behavior seems manageable, that unprocessed trauma can sometimes pop up later if it's not dealt with. If a child has experienced trauma, it is a great thing to recommend that they get some professional help. And I told you about kids in my office. I've had kids who have come in and done trauma narratives in all sorts of very fun ways. I've had kids who have made comic books of the trauma that took place with them. And when they are able to finish their story, they turn into a superhero in the comic and they beat all of the trauma that took place. It's amazing. I've had a client and he had some really intense trauma happen. He came in and he wanted to beat up my wrestling dummy every single day that he came in. And he said, let's play WWE. He did not know that I am a professional wrestler. And he was like, how do you know the names of all these moves? And I was like, I don't know, man. I just like it. And he would beat up this wrestling dummy every time, and almost every session he would say, Mr. Stu, I want you to be my tag team partner. And so we'd tag team and we'd beat up this thing, and he'd be shouting things at this dummy that happened to him back in the trauma, but he was being playful about it. And then one day he looked at me and he said, Mr. Stu, I'm going to beat up that dummy. I don't need your help today. Oh. And he beat up the dummy. In earlier sessions, he beat up the dummy and then would have the dummy re-attack him, and the dummy won the match. The dummy beat him. And this day, he said, I don't need your help to beat this dummy up anymore. And he beat the dummy 1, 2, 3 and asked me to ring the bell. It's a fun, playful, silly thing, but it does require a professional many times to kind of get all the way through that. And you don't have to wait for a diagnosis to seek support. If you suspect that trauma has happened, or if you know that it has happened, get that child connected with a professional. It's going to be a lot of help. Earlier, I told you about the number 988, and I want to reiterate that number to you. It is a life-saving tool. 911 is for police, fire, and EMS. 988 is for any mental health emergency. If you need to report abuse, if you yourself are dealing with something that is really difficult and you need to talk to somebody, if you know someone who is dealing with something really difficult and they need to talk to somebody, you can call or text 988 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, 366 days a year on leap years. They will be there for you. 988. It is so easy and it can save a life. If you know or suspect that abuse has happened or trauma has happened with a child, you can call 988 and they can even coach you through specific things you can do to get that child connected to some help, or report the abuse if you need to, whatever it might be. They are there for you. Get connected. Use the number. What is the number? 988. Don't forget it. And tell everybody you know, 988. Let's talk now about some superpowers of trauma. Trauma is obviously something we never want a child to go through, but if they have been through it and then they get the support they need, those symptoms can become superpowers. Some of the most beautiful stories that I've ever experienced were children who had been through trauma, and maybe they're in middle school or whatever, and they say to me, Mr. Stu, I want to make sure that that never happens to anybody else ever again. How amazing and beautiful is that? That is a superpower. Or it could be that they're on the lookout for danger, and if you work through that in a symptomatic way where it's not just causing distress and difficulty for the child, them being on the lookout for danger is not a bad thing. They can be checking for safety in different situations. They're also hyper aware of emotions in other people, because sometimes that trauma happened and they watched other people, and now they can read people very well. And if they get the support they need, that can turn into the superpower of empathy, where they can be there for other people and really help other people to understand their emotions. Or if they have been through something difficult, it could be that they're just less shaken up about things in the future after they're able to work through it. And so they're able to deal with more difficulties because of what they've been through. Or if they've been through something, they can help others later on in life too. And I've had young children even who have been through something that was really difficult. And through our sessions, they'll tell me, Mr. Stu, I made a friend and they went through something kind of like me. And I told them it's going to be okay. Oh my goodness. I mean, how amazing is that? Just such a cool superpower for those kids to be able to be there for other kids. At the start of the session, I told you about some stories. The first one about a young child who had been through and experienced some community violence. In a recent session with me, he told me, I only fight now when I need to. And he said, which, that's okay. Me too, man. I only fight when I need to, when I'm getting paid and in the wrestling ring. I only fight when I need to. But last year, at the end of the year, he had been in several fights, and then he came into services and he worked through all of that. There were only 2 fights that happened from the time he started with me until the end of the year, which was several months of time. And he was able to tell me all the list of things that he went through before he got into a fight, how he tried to ask for help in so many different ways, and how the only reason he fought was out of self-defense. That is amazing for him to go from getting in fights and having no remorse for it whatsoever to now only fighting for self-defense. And actually one of those fights was him standing up for another kid, and he said they couldn't stand up for themselves, and so I decided I was going to be the one to stand up for them. And I didn't want to give him like a little attaboy of like, yeah, clock him in the head, but Oh, I told you about the child who had been through lots of abuse earlier on in his life, and he started participating in risky behaviors, and he started doing everything he could to appease other people. He is now in college. He has repaired relationships with both of his parents, and he did establish some firm boundaries with them first, but he now has positive relationships with both of his parents. He is successful in his job. He shows up sometimes in a shirt and tie at my office, and he says he wants to be a better man every day. How cool to go from that to who he is now. And then I told you about the child who witnessed domestic violence, and he would be running out of class or becoming physically aggressive anytime he was in a crowd or people were behind him or he'd hear a loud noise. He is now successfully discharged from all of my services. He went several months at the end of a school year without having any fights or running away, and he now says that he wants to be a police officer so that he can stand up for other people and make sure that nobody ever has to deal with the things that he went through when he was very, very young. That is how those symptoms can become superpowers. Make sure that you're on the watch for those changes, patterns, and extremes. Remember, it could mean trauma has happened, but it likely means that child needs extra support. And that leads me to say this. Thank you so much for being here. Whether you have been to just one session, or whether you have been to all the sessions, or you picked just a few, or you were on vacation through some, or whatever it might be, thank you so much, because it takes a village to raise a child. And by being here, you have decided to step into that village. So let me say it for the kids who might not have the words to say it to you. Thank you. They are thanking you. Even though they might not know it, and even though they might not have the words to say it, thank you for being here. Because by learning about these things, and by learning about support, and just by wanting to understand them even more, you are saying you believe that bad kids don't exist, that kids deserve support, and that you are willing to be that for them. Thank you so much for being here, and please, if you have any questions, I'll be around for a while, but you all are absolutely amazing. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Will be online in the next several weeks. I had to wait until all 5 were done so that they can all be edited together, and they will go up online as well. So be on the lookout. I will make sure that St. Matthew's is aware, and they'll post about it, that it goes up. So yeah, thank you.